I always thought betrayal would come with warning signs, angry words, slammed doors, maybe a breaking point you could see coming. But mine came folded in a stiff white envelope, delivered by a courier who barely met my eyes before walking away. The envelope was addressed to me in cold, formal lettering, summons to probate court. Inside, my family's names were neatly stacked in legal ink, plaintiffs. And mine, lonely at the bottom, defendant. It took a moment before my knees gave out, and I had to sit down right there on the front step. I don't know how long I stayed like that, staring at the letter, the words blurring into meaningless shapes. But I remember the feeling that settled over me, something between shame and fury, like someone had taken my ribs apart and left the rest of me hollow. They were suing me. Not for something I'd done wrong. Not for a mistake or a crime. They were suing me for what my grandfather left behind and what they believed I didn't deserve. My name is Ava. I'm 32. And up until 6 months ago, I was my grandfather's full-time caregiver. His name was Henry Clayton. He was the strongest man I ever knew, gruff, stubborn, wickedly smart, and painfully lonely. After Grandma died, the house got too quiet. He didn't say it outright, but when I offered to move in and take care of him, he didn't hesitate. For 4 years, I was there. Through late-night ER visits, pill schedules, doctor's appointments, and days when he forgot what year it was. I fed him, bathed him, sat through stories I'd heard 100 times just to make him feel like someone was listening. I gave up a promotion, a relationship, and, on some days, my sanity. The rest of the family? They visited maybe once a year. If that. They'd show up for birthdays with store-bought cake and fake smiles. They'd pose for a few pictures, hand Grandpa a card, and vanish until the next obligation. I didn't mind. Not really. I figured we each had our own way of loving or avoiding what we didn't want to face. But then Grandpa passed. Quietly. In his sleep. I found him early one morning in the recliner, the TV still flickering blue light across his face. He looked peaceful. And, just like that, everything changed. The funeral was a blur. People showed up who hadn't visited in years. My mother cried the loudest. My father gave some speech about legacy. My older sister Naomi fussed over flower arrangements like it was a wedding, not a goodbye. No one asked how I was holding up. A few days later, I went to meet with the estate attorney. I had no idea what to expect. Grandpa had told me more than once that he'd made sure I'd be taken care of. That I wouldn't have to worry. But when the lawyer opened the file, his face darkened. The will, he said slowly, is missing. We searched everywhere. Safe, desk drawers, safety deposit box, all empty. It was like it had never existed. No digital copy. No witnesses. Just gone. The only document on record was an old version from 15 years ago. One that split everything evenly between his 3 children, my parents, my Aunt Ruth, and my Uncle Dean. But Grandpa hadn't spoken to Ruth in over a decade. Uncle Dean was dead. And my parents? They hadn't called him in months. Still, without a new will, that old one stood. I tried to explain. I told them he'd updated it, that he said he wanted me to have the house. That he'd made arrangements. But without proof, it didn't matter. And then they came for me. My own parents. My sister. My brother. Claiming I had manipulated him. That I'd forced him to change the will. That I'd hidden the new one. They called it elder exploitation. Said I took advantage of a confused old man. Painted me like some opportunist who played nurse just long enough to snatch the deed. They were demanding everything. The house. His savings. His car. Even the old coin collection in the basement. All of it. I remember sitting at the kitchen table that night with the summons in my hands. The same table where I used to help Grandpa count out his meds. The same one where he'd once told me, grinning over lukewarm tea, "You're the only one who really sees me, kid." I reached for my phone. I don't know why, maybe to call my mom, maybe to scream or beg or ask how she could do this. But my hand stopped midair. Because suddenly, it was clear. This wasn't about grief. It wasn't about fairness. It was about greed. They had written me off when I was useful. Now that Grandpa was gone and there was something to fight over, I was a threat. And threats get eliminated. They said I owed them everything. But they never once asked what it cost me. Not the 4 years I gave up. Not the heartbreak. Not the nights I sat up crying while he forgot my name. They just wanted what was left behind, even if they had to bury me to get it. And for the first time in months, I didn't cry. I just stared at the wall, thinking, if they want a war, I'll give them the truth. And the truth is going to burn. The morning of the funeral, the house felt colder than usual. Not just from the November wind pressing against the windows, but from something else. Something quieter. Heavier. I stood in front of the mirror, fixing the collar of the black blouse I hadn't worn in years. It didn't quite fit anymore, but it would do. Nothing about that day felt like it fit, not the clothes, not the rituals, not the people I'd be forced to smile at. I wasn't prepared for the silence. Or for the whispers. As I walked into the chapel, I caught it immediately, cousins shifting their gaze when I approached, the subtle way my uncle's wife stiffened when I offered a hug. My older brother Darren offered a handshake instead of an embrace. My sister Naomi barely met my eyes. The only genuine moment was when the pastor asked if anyone wanted to share a memory, and I stood up, heart pounding, clutching the folded note I'd rewritten 5 times. I only got a few sentences in before I saw the tight-lipped smirk from my mother. That's when I realized they had already decided I didn't belong. After the service, we all returned to Grandpa's home, my home, for the last 4 years. I had prepared the living room with extra chairs, refreshments, flowers. It felt right to offer the space he loved to the people who claimed to love him. But they moved through it like they owned it. Like I was just some awkward hostess at a party I didn't plan. I noticed Naomi lingering by the fireplace, running her fingers over the carved wooden mantelpiece, something Grandpa had made himself back in the 60s. She whispered something to Darren, who nodded. Then the quiet looting began. Small things at first. My Aunt Ruth took the brass clock off the side table. My cousin Lily carried out a box of photo albums she didn't even help create. Naomi tucked the old silver locket from Grandma's vanity into her coat pocket. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, watching the home I had preserved, cared for, and protected become stripped like it was up for auction. Can we maybe slow down a bit? I asked, my voice trying to stay level. He just passed. Maybe we could go through things together. Respectfully. My father turned to me with that same mocking smile I remembered from my teenage years. Don't be dramatic, Ava. These are family memories. Everyone's entitled to something. I lived here. I took care of him, I said, quieter now. I'm not saying no one should have anything. I just think maybe it should be discussed. That's when my mother stepped in. She set her cup down, walked right up to me, and said in a tone loud enough for everyone to hear, "Don't get too comfortable." She didn't have to raise her voice. The venom was in the calm. I blinked at her, stunned. What does that mean? She leaned in, close enough for her perfume to drown me. It means you shouldn't assume things that haven't been earned. Earned? I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab every medication chart, every surgical appointment, every night I'd held Grandpa's hand through pain, and throw it at her feet like evidence in a trial. But I didn't. I just nodded. Because in that moment, I understood. This wasn't grief. This was preparation. They were already dividing what he left behind, already preparing for a war over things, not memories. Property, not love. A few days later, the house was emptier. Not in the physical sense, his scent still clung to the armchair, the kitchen still smelled like the cinnamon tea he loved, but emotionally, it was hollow. I wandered upstairs into the attic, half hoping to find something, maybe the will, maybe a letter, maybe even just a sign that Grandpa had anticipated this mess. Instead, I found something else. In a dusty box marked Family, 1989, I found old photo albums. I opened one and started flipping through the pages. There we were, vacations, birthdays, awkward holiday dinners. And then I found the one photo that stopped my heart. It was from my 8th birthday. We were at the lake cabin. My cake was shaped like a butterfly. Grandpa had his arm around me. But someone had taken a pen, maybe a knife, and scratched my face out. Only mine. The rest of the family remained, smiling in sepia. I sat there staring at it for so long, the edges of the photo started to blur from the tears I didn't even feel falling. I wasn't surprised. I was just hollow. That night, I walked through the house with a trash bag, throwing away the leftovers from the funeral reception. The discarded napkins, half-eaten casseroles, sympathy cards filled with empty words. The kitchen light flickered. I didn't bother fixing it. I stood in the middle of the living room, where the mantel now looked bare, where her locket used to sit, where his clock used to tick. The silence screamed louder than any fight we could have had. They'd made their message clear. I wasn't one of them. Not really. Not anymore. They buried him. And with him, any illusion that I had a family. The courthouse smelled like old paper and cold air. I sat at the defense table, hands clenched in my lap, trying not to let my fingers tremble. My lawyer, a quiet but sharp man named Lucas Morelli, clicked through documents on his tablet with mechanical calm. Across the aisle, my family huddled together like victims in a crime drama. My mother wore black again, as if still in mourning, though I hadn't seen her cry once since Grandpa died. Naomi dabbed at her eyes with a tissue that looked too clean. Darren, ever the actor, wore a solemn expression like it was tailored for the occasion. The judge entered. We rose. My stomach twisted. Then it began. Their attorney, a slick, silver-tongued man with the warmth of a stone wall, launched into the opening remarks. This case is not about grief. It's about exploitation. About a young woman who inserted herself into an elderly man's vulnerable final years and manipulated him for personal gain. He gestured at me, as if I were something caught in his teeth. My jaw tightened, but I said nothing. I didn't flinch. Because that's exactly what they wanted. Naomi was the first to take the stand. She spoke gently, her voice wavering at all the right moments. We loved our grandfather, she said. But Ava, she isolated him. She wouldn't let us visit. She always made excuses. That was a lie. She hadn't even tried. She even told me once, right before his stroke, not to come around because it confused him. Another lie. I looked at Lucas. His face didn't move, but he tapped his pen twice against his notes. That was our agreed-upon signal. We'll address it later, don't react now. Next was Darren. He claimed I had withheld bank documents. That I'd redirected mail. That Grandpa had seemed frightened during his final year. He even produced a copy of an email, allegedly sent from me to the family lawyer, asking to delay the will discussion indefinitely. It was a doctored message. I'd never written those words. Lucas leaned in and whispered, "We'll request forensic email tracking." But it's not a good look. The worst part wasn't what they said. It was how well they said it. They cried. They quoted scripture. My mother recited the 10 Commandments, honor thy father and thy mother, as if the irony didn't sting her tongue. They painted me like a vulture in nurse's clothing. A selfish woman who took advantage of an old man's loneliness to secure a future that was never hers to claim. And the courtroom, full of strangers, watched me like I was on trial for murder. Not once did they mention the 4 years I cared for him. Not once did they mention the birthday parties I threw just for the two of us, or the hours spent reading to him when his eyesight faded, or the way he'd light up when I played his favorite jazz records. No, that part didn't fit their narrative. After a recess, Lucas pulled me into a quiet room beside the hallway. They're good, he said simply. Too good. I stared at the floor. But we have truth. Truth isn't always enough, Ava. Not in court. We need proof. Tangible, legal, provable evidence. Right now, all we have is your word and theirs. And they came in armed. I swallowed hard. If we don't find something, they might actually win, he finished gently. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house barefoot, every board groaning under the weight of memory. The mug he used. The cane still by the front door. His old recliner. I sat in it, pulled the blanket over my knees the way he used to, and closed my eyes. Suddenly, the courtroom faded. And I was back in the kitchen on a warm spring afternoon. Grandpa sat at the table, holding a pen in his weathered hand, writing slowly in that deliberate print of his. What are you writing? I had asked. Notes. Letters. Things I want you to remember, even when I'm not around to say them out loud. He'd smiled. Words are better than things. Things get fought over. Words stay. I remembered those notebooks. The ones he used to tuck under his mattress or behind the bookshelf. I'd never looked through them much. He said some were just ramblings. I stood up fast, rushed to the back room. There, behind a stack of photo albums and a few old tax folders, I found one. Thin, bound in cracked brown leather. Inside, page after page of his thoughts, scribbled neatly. Sometimes dated. Sometimes just titled with phrases like morning light or thoughts after Ava made lasagna. There were lines like, "She's the only one who asks how I really feel. I wish the others called more. Ava never forgets. If there's any fairness in this world, this house will belong to her." My throat tightened. Lucas would say it wasn't legal proof. But to me, it was everything. The next morning, back in court, I sat quietly while my mother took the stand. She talked about sacrifices. How she raised us alone when my father was overseas. How Grandpa had helped them financially, and that it was only right the estate returned to his true family. I didn't speak. Not when she lied. Not when she sniffled. Not when she looked at me like I was a stranger. Because I wasn't ready yet. I wasn't going to defend myself with noise. I wasn't going to beg for understanding. I was waiting. Waiting for the right piece. The right moment. The one paper they never thought I'd find. Because their case was built on lies. And mine? Mine was built on the one thing they couldn't fake. His trust. I didn't mean to cry. I'd held it together through 3 days of court, through the lies, the false tears, the rehearsed testimonies from people who'd barely visited Grandpa in his final years. I kept my back straight, my voice level, my eyes dry. But everyone has a breaking point. Mine came when the judge called for recess, and I stepped into the hallway outside the courtroom. The air smelled of varnished wood and too much perfume, and my hands were shaking as I tried to unscrew the cap of a water bottle. It fell to the floor and rolled to the edge of the baseboard. When I bent to retrieve it, I heard footsteps behind me, then a voice, too close, too cruel. "You're not going to win, Ava." I straightened slowly. It was Darren. My older brother. Always the golden child. Always just smug enough to make everything sting a little worse. He leaned in, lowered his voice. "We're going to take it all. You think you deserve it, but you don't. You never have." Before I could answer, Naomi walked past on her phone, barely glancing at me. My mother followed, slowing just long enough to glance at my reddening eyes. She smiled. Smiled. Not the warm kind, the kind that says you've already lost. That's when the tears came. Not in sobs. Just silent, steady streaks down my cheeks. I pressed the heel of my hand against them like I could force them back inside. But it was too late. A courthouse security guard passed by and looked away politely, giving me space to fall apart without witnesses. But I wasn't alone. They had seen me cry and they laughed. Later that evening, I sat in Grandpa's chair, the courtroom echo still ringing in my ears. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. It felt like it had been invaded by my family's voices, their greed, their shadows. My phone buzzed with a message from Lucas. Still no luck with the will. No witness signatures, no alternate copies on file. "I'll keep digging. Don't give up yet." I almost replied I already have. But I didn't send it. Instead, I tossed my phone onto the coffee table and stood up. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe a memory to hang on to, maybe a hidden note or a sign. I moved from room to room, opening drawers, checking behind books, lifting picture frames like I expected something to be taped behind them. It was in the guest bedroom, the one nobody ever used. There was an old dresser, mostly filled with dusty linens and old magazines. I opened the bottom drawer and found a stack of unopened envelopes, yellowed with time. Some were junk mail. One was from the VA. And at the very bottom was a letter in a familiar scrawl, folded neatly, addressed simply to, "For Ava, if it ever gets ugly." My breath caught. I opened it slowly, afraid the paper would crumble. The ink was slightly smudged, but the handwriting was still legible, steady and sharp, just like him. "Kiddo, I hope you never have to read this. But if you are, then things didn't go as smooth as I hoped. You've always been the one who saw people clearly. I knew I could trust you, not just with my pills or my mail or the TV remote, but with me. I've been meaning to fix the paperwork, but my hands haven't been as steady as they used to be. If things ever get messy, look where I used to keep your birthday cards. You'll find a clue. You'll know what to do. Love you always. Grandpa." My heart was racing. Birthday cards? I ran upstairs to the attic. There, on the top shelf, was an old shoebox I hadn't touched in years. Inside were all the cards he'd given me every year since I was 9. Some had little jokes, others long letters. One had a $20 bill still tucked inside. At the bottom was a red envelope with no card in it, just a folded index card. On it, in faded black ink, were 4 words and a number. First Bank, Box 2113. A safety deposit box. I staggered back, clutching the card like it might disappear. I had never heard him mention it. Never seen a key. But the handwriting was his. No doubt. My hands trembled again, but this time not from despair. Because for the first time in weeks, something shifted. A thread. A lead. A possibility. I returned to the living room, letter in hand, and sat down slowly. The chair creaked beneath me. The silence settled around my shoulders. They thought they'd broken me. They wanted me desperate, defeated, ashamed. They saw my tears and laughed because they thought it meant they'd won. But tears aren't surrender. They're just the fire before the rise. And now? Now I had a direction. I didn't know what was in that box. But I knew this much. He left me a way out. And I was going to find it. The next morning, I stood in front of First Bank, clutching my grandfather's note in one hand and a dull ache in my chest. The building itself was unremarkable, red brick, green awning, glass doors, but it held a promise my family never expected me to uncover. I walked in and approached the front desk. "Hi," I said, voice steady despite the storm inside me. "I think my grandfather had a safety deposit box here. Box 2113. His name was Henry Clayton." The clerk glanced at the note, then at her screen. She paused. "Do you have the key?" "No," I admitted. "But I think I know where it is." Back home, I tore through everything I could think of: drawers, old jackets, kitchen jars. Nothing. Then I remembered something strange. The last time I helped Grandpa up the stairs, he'd refused to let me touch his old walking cane, even though he wasn't using it anymore. Said, "That one stays with me. It's got more secrets than bones." It was propped against the umbrella stand by the door. I picked it up and noticed the handle was loose. I twisted it slowly. Click. The top popped open to reveal a tiny velvet pouch. My breath caught as I poured its contents into my palm. Inside, a single silver key. Back at the bank, I handed it over along with my ID. The manager was called. A small, polite woman with sharp eyes, she led me through a locked door and down a corridor lined with metal boxes. She stopped in front of box 2113. "We'll give you privacy," she said. "Let us know when you're finished." The box slid out with a smooth, metallic sound. I placed it on the table in the tiny room and opened it, heart pounding in my throat. At first glance, it didn't look like much. Just a manila envelope, a small black USB drive, and a brown leather-bound notebook. But I knew better. I opened the envelope first. Inside was a notarized letter, dated just over a year ago. "To whom it may concern. My name is Henry Clayton. I am of sound mind, and I wish to make my intentions absolutely clear in the event of any legal dispute. I have revised my will to ensure that my granddaughter, Ava Clayton, inherits my home and personal assets. She has been my primary caregiver, financial manager, and source of companionship during my final years. The rest of the family has, regrettably, distanced themselves from me, emotionally and physically. I do not believe they are entitled to anything beyond what I've already given. If this letter is being read, then someone has likely challenged my wishes. I ask the court to honor what I have put into motion. Enclosed are supporting documents. Henry A. Clayton." It was signed and stamped by a notary I didn't recognize, but the name was real: Olivia Marks, a name I would make sure Lucas followed up on immediately. My hands shook as I picked up the USB next. Back at home, I plugged it into my laptop. The screen flickered, then played a video. There he was, sitting in his chair, wearing the navy cardigan I used to tease him about. His voice was slower than I remembered, but steady. "Hi, kiddo. If you're watching this, things have gone sideways. I'm sorry. You tried to do right by me. I know that. And I need others to know it too. So here it is, plain and simple. I chose you. Not because you asked. Not because you expected it, but because you showed up when no one else did. I saw things, Ava. The way your father used my name to open lines of credit. The way Darren funneled money through that consulting job I never approved. I wrote it all down. Every dollar, every lie. And if they try to call you a thief, show them who the real ones were. I had to pause the video. The screen blurred through my tears. Not grief this time. Relief. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't making it up. He saw it all. He knew what they were capable of. I opened the leather-bound notebook next. Inside were meticulously documented entries. Bank statements showing money missing from Grandpa's account in months when I was out of town. Notes detailing when Darren came asking for a loan that was never repaid. Printouts and receipts, some annotated in red ink, unauthorized. He'd started this long before he died. Quietly. Thoughtfully. Preparing. For me. For this exact moment. I sat there in that tiny bank vault room, sobbing quietly into my sleeve, clutching the notebook to my chest. They called me a manipulator. Said I was a liar. A thief. But he knew the truth. And now I had the proof in my hands. Later that night, I met Lucas at his office. I laid everything on the table. The letter, the USB, the notebook. He flipped through the pages slowly, then looked up at me with something rare in his expression. Hope. This, he said, voice low and certain, changes everything. I nodded. And for the first time since the lawsuit began, I believed it. The courtroom felt colder that morning. Not physically, though the old vents hummed with recycled air, but in atmosphere. Like something was about to shift. Like the sky before a storm. Lucas adjusted his tie and leaned toward me. You ready? I nodded, though my heart beat loud enough to drown out every thought. Across the aisle, my family looked relaxed. Naomi scrolled through her phone. Darren cracked his knuckles, confident. My mother sat with a smug smile fixed like foundation. They thought it was over. They thought they'd won. The judge entered. We all rose. Court is now back in session, the bailiff announced. The family's lawyer stood with the calm assurance of a man expecting an easy victory. Your Honor, he began smoothly. We've presented compelling evidence that suggests Ms. Clayton used undue influence, withheld key documents, and acted against the best interests of her late grandfather, Henry Clayton. He turned to gesture toward me. There is no valid will on file. There are no living witnesses to any revisions. And all we have are the testimonies of family members who watched from a distance as their loved one was isolated and controlled. He offered a sympathetic smile to the jury. This isn't about money. It's about justice. He sat down. Lucas didn't move. The judge glanced at us. Anything further from the defense before we proceed to deliberation? Lucas stood. Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to submit new evidence. There was a murmur in the courtroom. My mother's brow furrowed. Naomi sat up straighter. The judge looked over his glasses. You're aware this is highly irregular at this stage. We are, Your Honor, Lucas said. But this evidence was only just discovered, relevant, notarized, and authenticated. We believe it materially alters the nature of the case. The judge sighed but motioned us forward. Lucas handed over the notarized letter and explained the accompanying documents, the USB, the video, and the handwritten ledger. Proceed, the judge said reluctantly. Lucas inserted the USB into the court's computer and brought the video to life. The screen flickered. And then there he was. Grandpa. Sitting in his recliner, dressed in his navy cardigan, his voice slow but strong. To the judge reading this. I want you to know exactly what my intentions were. A ripple moved through the courtroom. My name is Henry Clayton. I was born in 1942. I served in the Army. I worked 38 years as a machinist. And I raised 3 kids I don't hear from unless they want something. My granddaughter, Ava Clayton, has taken care of me, cooked for me, cleaned, sat by my side when no one else did. She never asked for anything. Never manipulated me. I told her I wanted her to have the house. The money. Whatever I had left. She didn't ask, I offered. And if anyone tells you otherwise, they're lying. Including my son and my daughter-in-law. Darren, too. I've included a record of financial discrepancies I noticed starting in 2019. It was Darren. It was Ava's father. I won't be around to see this play out, but I hope to God the truth finds the light. Gasps echoed from the courtroom gallery. A reporter scribbled notes furiously. The jury leaned in. On the screen, Grandpa folded his hands in his lap. I may not have made it to the lawyer in time to fix every file, but I made my intentions clear. I trust her. Not because she's blood, but because she showed up. The screen faded to black. Silence. A beat passed. Then the shouting began. No, that video's fake. Darren stood, red-faced, shouting. My mother grabbed his arm, hissing, "Sit down. Sit down now." The judge banged the gavel. Order. This is a court of law, not a circus. Naomi muttered something under her breath, glaring at me like I'd just risen from the dead. Lucas remained calm, arms folded. Your Honor, I'd also like to submit this ledger, written by Mr. Clayton, outlining unauthorized withdrawals and financial abuse. It corroborates his video testimony. The judge held up a hand to silence the noise. He opened the notarized letter. His eyes scanned the pages slowly, then looked up at me. Miss Clayton, he said, voice firm, why did you wait until now to present this? I stood, my voice steady. Because I didn't want to win with noise. I wanted to win with truth. And I had to find it first. The judge nodded. Very well. I'm suspending deliberation until this evidence is formally reviewed. This court will reconvene tomorrow morning. Gavel. Recess. Outside, my family filed past me like shadows. My mother refused to look at me. Naomi muttered, "You always think you're the hero." Darren glared. "You forged that. You'll go down with us." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because I had already won the one thing they never expected me to find. A voice louder than theirs. Back in the courthouse hallway, I sat with Lucas on the bench. He turned to me and asked, "How are you holding up?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stared at the courtroom doors. At the place where Grandpa's voice echoed even after death. At the place where the lies started to crack under the weight of something undeniable. Then I finally said it. He had the last word. And he chose to say it for me. By the time the courtroom reconvened the next morning, the air was different. There was no smugness on Darren's face, no defiant glint in my mother's eyes. Even Naomi seemed smaller, her designer heels clicking a little too fast across the marble floor as she followed their lawyer to the bench. They weren't in control anymore. They were circling the drain, and they knew it. Lucas handed over a thick folder to the court clerk, nodding once to the bailiff. I sat still, watching as the pieces we'd gathered, every receipt, every annotated bank transfer, every signature Grandpa had documented, made their way to the judge's desk. The defense respectfully submits Exhibit 9, Lucas said. Supporting documentation of financial misconduct and suspected elder abuse, compiled by Mr. Henry Clayton before his death. The judge took the file, expression unreadable. He opened the first page. Silence fell across the room like a dropped curtain. Inside the folder were over a dozen separate entries. Unexplained withdrawals totaling $38,000 over 2 years. Checks written to a shell LLC Darren had formed, one that Grandpa never authorized. Forged signatures on service contracts. A letter from a neighbor who'd witnessed Darren berating Grandpa on his front lawn. Every entry was dated. Every note written in Grandpa's clear, blocky print. Many had been notarized. And now, with the video as context, they weren't just suspicions. They were evidence. The judge read slowly, page by page. His lips tightened. The courtroom was deathly still, until he set the folder aside and looked up. Mr. Clayton, he said, directing his gaze at my father. My father straightened. Do you deny authorizing these financial transactions on behalf of your father? He didn't answer right away. I helped him with some banking when he was confused. But it wasn't. The judge cut him off. So you admit to handling his finances without formal guardianship or power of attorney? I was his son. That's not a legal defense. Then the judge turned to Darren. And you? What was the purpose of the payments to Eldridge Consulting? That was a business arrangement. Grandpa agreed. Did he agree in writing? On record. Darren's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then Lucas stood. Your Honor, Based on the severity of the findings, we've also submitted these documents to the county attorney's office. We've been informed that a warrant is being issued. And as if on cue, the side doors opened. 2 uniformed police officers entered the courtroom, their presence immediate and undeniable. One of them approached the bench and handed over a folder. The judge opened it, read it quickly, and nodded. "Mr. Darren Clayton," he said, "you are being taken into custody for suspicion of embezzlement and financial fraud." The officers stepped toward Darren, who stood up too quickly, knocking over his chair. "This is insane. I didn't do anything wrong." "Sir, please don't resist," one of the officers warned, pulling out cuffs. My father stood too. "You can't arrest my son in the middle of this. This is still a civil case." The second officer turned toward him. "Actually, Mr. Clayton, we have a second warrant. You're being detained for investigation into the misappropriation of funds from Mr. Henry Clayton's estate." My mother rose from the gallery, eyes wide with horror. No, this is a mistake. We didn't do anything wrong." She rushed toward Darren as the cuffs clicked shut around his wrists. "Don't touch him, ma'am," the officer warned, gently pushing her back. She screamed. A full, breaking, furious scream. Reporters outside the courtroom snapped into action. Flashbulbs popped. Phones raised. Shouts spilled in from the hallway. "Is it true? Were you stealing from your father? Miss Clayton, how does it feel to be cleared?" But I didn't move. I sat still, watching them be led away, red-faced, flailing in disbelief. The same people who laughed when I cried. Who built a case on lies. Who tried to bury me under the weight of their own guilt. The courtroom slowly settled. The judge turned to the jury. "In light of the new evidence and the unfolding criminal investigation, I find no grounds to continue this trial. The inheritance is to remain as intended. The property and assets will be retained by Ms. Ava Clayton." He paused, looking at me now. "You are officially cleared of all accusations." I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just nodded, then stood, collecting my coat and bag. As I walked past the gallery, Naomi lowered her eyes. She didn't speak. My mother just stood there, stunned, as if her mouth had forgotten how to form words. Outside, the reporters surged, but Lucas raised a hand and shielded me as we made our way to the parking lot. "Ava," he said as we reached the car. "You did it." "No," I replied softly, unlocking the door. "He did." I drove home alone. The courthouse faded behind me, replaced by long roads and rustling trees. The house waited in stillness, sunlight streaming across the porch. I stood on the threshold, the keys still cold in my hand. This time, I didn't feel like an intruder in my own life. This time, the home was mine undisputed. And for the first time since the war began, I let myself breathe. The barn still creaks when the wind blows too hard. The roof leaks a little near the north corner after heavy rain. The floorboards groan like they're remembering every boot that ever stepped on them. But it's mine now. All of it. 6 months have passed since the courtroom drama, the shouting, the arrests, the headlines that made my name infamous for a week before vanishing into the next scandal. Life, I've learned, doesn't stop for fallout. It just asks what you're going to do with the silence afterward. I turned the old barn into a studio. Grandpa used to call it the junk shed, but beneath the dust and rusted tools, there was space, good space. I scrubbed it down, painted the walls, hung string lights from the rafters, and rolled in a long table I found at a flea market. It became my sanctuary. My beginning. I started painting again. Not for galleries. Not for approval. Just for the joy of it. For the first time in years, my brush moved without apology. No deadlines, no judgment. Just color and memory. One of my first pieces was a quiet portrait of Grandpa in his chair, soft blue light around him, that tired smirk I knew so well. I hung it above the fireplace. The rest of the house is peaceful now. I've replaced the photos my mother stole, reupholstered the couch, restored the creaking porch swing. Most nights, I sit there with tea and watch the sky darken behind the hills. No noise. No litigation. No lies. Just the hum of crickets, the chirp of owls, the heartbeat of home. As for my family, Darren took a plea deal. He's serving a reduced sentence for financial fraud. My father avoided jail time, but his reputation is gone. The last I heard, he's working part-time and trying to avoid interviews. My mother never apologized. Never reached out. But that's fine. I've learned not every wound needs closure. Naomi sent a single message 3 months ago. I didn't know. I thought you were trying to steal. I was wrong. I didn't respond. Not out of anger. Just acceptance. Some relationships don't need repairing. Some doors close for a reason. I kept the inheritance. Not because I needed to prove I was right, but because it's what Grandpa wanted. Still, I couldn't keep it all. So I donated a significant portion to a caregiver advocacy group in his name. They fund resources, training, and mental health support for people who do what I did, often alone, often unacknowledged. I wrote a note with the donation. For the ones who stayed. For the ones who loved without reward. For the ones who gave everything and asked for nothing. It felt right. People often ask if I feel vindicated. I don't. I feel free. Because the truth is, revenge isn't loud. It's not a headline. It's not a handcuff. Sometimes, it's just peace. Peace in knowing you survived what tried to break you. Peace in knowing you didn't become what they said you were. Peace in the quiet click of a door that closes behind you for good. One afternoon, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in months and found a photo. Me and Grandpa, sitting on the porch, both barefoot. I was maybe 10. He was smiling in that rare, honest way, head back, eyes closed, like the world had made sense for just a second. I ran my thumb across the image. And I thought, he never wanted a fight. He just wanted me to be okay. I hope he knows I am. People love to say I took everything. The house. The money. The land. The name. But they're wrong. I didn't take everything. I took my life back. That's all I ever wanted. The life they tried to steal. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. Tell us, what would you have done in her place? More powerful, true inspired stories coming every day. Sometimes, walking away isn't weakness, it's winning. She didn't just survive the betrayal. She turned it into peace.